So I'm with Peter Tobia, and Peter, you told me a crazy, fascinating story, and I want the rest of these guys to hear it because it's an interesting story. It's something that you lived through and something that happened that they can check on and verify it on 60 Minutes. And with that, take it away.
All right. Well, a number of years ago, I was introduced to a gentleman who contended that he was a retired doctor, early age, in his mid-50s, and he said that he had an associate of his who had found a whole bunch of emeralds on the beach right here in Florida. We're on the Treasure Coast.
And we're here in Florida right now on the beach.
Right here on the beautiful Treasure Coast, east coast of Florida, in the Atlantic. And the story was that somebody used to work for him had found these emeralds just on the beach. And he found a whole bunch of them, and he was the only guy he trusted. His name was Jay Miskovich. Was sitting right here in our condo, and he had unfortunately got beat up in the market crash of 2008, the housing market. He had been flipping houses in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. He had a very big home, 4,000 or 5,000 foot home on a 12-acre mountaintop, Latrobe, Pennsylvania. But he was devastated when I was talking to him. And I said, well, why don't we go get those emeralds? And he says, well, it's going to take some money. I said, well, I'll raise you a few bucks. So I raised him a few bucks with some other people, and lo and behold, he shows up with 7 pounds of uncut emeralds and puts them on my countertop right here at the condo. Needless to say, I was amazed. I knew they weren't broken Heineken bottles. Yeah. I didn't know much about emeralds. And that began an interesting saga. So shortly thereafter, he came to me and was having problems. He was being evicted from his home. He didn't have the money to rent a truck to move his belongings out. He really had hit hard times. So I said, well, look, I can't help you completely. I said, but I got a friend of mine who has a small hedge fund. He's a PhD economist. I'll call Anthony and we'll talk about it. So I had a conference call with Jay and my associate Anthony, and at that time I had made a deal with Jay that I had a percentage of the emerald find, as did these other associates of mine who had put up some money. And I had an hour conversation, conference call on a Thursday night, never forget it. And I had told Anthony that, I said, look, you're both free and over 21. I said, I do have a dog in this fight, but if you guys can make a deal, I can't help Jay at the moment, but maybe you can. So we talked for about an hour. Anthony had known I had seen the emeralds, at least that they existed. He knew and trusted me completely.
You verified that you seen something. You didn't know really you took his word. That
I didn't know what I knew. They certainly looked like emeralds from what I knew, but we're correct. So at that point, Anthony and we talked for about an hour, as I said, mostly Jay talking to Anthony. And at the end of the conversation, Anthony asked the relevant question, what are you offering? And Jay said, I'm offering 2% of the deal for $60,000. And nobody asked me, and wasn't relevant whether or not I agreed or didn't agree. It was their money and their deal. So there was a 15-second pregnant pause, and Anthony said, okay. He didn't beat him down, didn't try to get a better deal. The next day, he wired Jay $10,000. The next week, he wired him $50,000. And that began, in earnest, the story of the emeralds. So Jay would come down and stay at the condo here, and one day he stayed when he had the money and when he got the money from Anthony, and we'd drive down the beach a couple hours, and he'd drop me off at McDonald's and go, and it was almost like it felt like it was a drug deal or something. He said, here, wait at the McDonald's. He'd come back in an hour and he'd have a duffel bag with emeralds in it, 30, 40, 50 pounds of uncut emeralds and amethyst and quartz. And it was mind-boggling. So Jay had complained that his brother supposedly had always told me privately his brother hadn't helped him, that he owed him some money, whatever. This was his story, and he was a little upset about it. But then his brother got involved. His brother brought in the friend of his who was from Cornell. The gentleman from Cornell, I won't mention any names, but he had managed a $19 billion hedge fund for Citibank, and this gentleman came through Jay's brother. And someone else, another gentleman who was a neighbor of Jay's brother. And we had a meeting down in West Palm, Jay, myself, some of the Emeralds, and this gentleman, his name is Dean, and his brother-in-law, who had started a brokerage company up in Canada purportedly and sold out for a large amount of money. So for 2 days we stayed there and we were talking. And what happened was, though, the story, when Jay began telling the story to this Dean gentleman and the other gentleman, was different than what he had told me. But being familiar with treasure, I realized sometimes that some people don't want to tell where the stuff came from. So
that does happen a lot.
Happens a lot.
Aren't going to tell you where exactly.
Absolutely, they'll tell you it came off of the beach and it probably came off of a mountaintop.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So it didn't completely surprise me. However, I didn't. I just backed up with my interest and said, hey, I got my piece of this. And Jay would talk to me almost daily, and he began, now he had his new wealthy friends, and they began going to New York and meeting with big law firms, and they brought in, they had shown the emeralds to the Jeff Post, who was the head of the Smithsonian. It was a gentleman who had the largest collection of colored diamonds in the world, who was vying for a piece of this deal. Who wanted very much to buy into this deal, supposedly. It was an interesting time. I've taken him to Sotheby's, taken him to Christie's. So along the way, Jay is doing his thing. There was one time when Jay had a girlfriend. He was not married. He had a lady friend up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. I had met her once. So one day she calls me up and she says, Pete, I don't know what this, it was on a Sunday, and she was tearful. And she said, Jay dropped me off early, he dropped me off on Saturday. I guess she had a couple children, so they had some kind of relationship that they were together on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And she had somebody taking care of her kids or whatever. So she said, Jay dropped me off early on Sunday, and on Saturday or Sunday, and he said he wished he had a gun so that he could blow his brains out in front of me, knowing that my father had committed suicide, which was pretty weird. So I said, okay. I says, her name is Jennifer. So I said, okay, Jennifer. So I called Jay and got no answer on Sunday. Called Jay Monday morning. I said, hey, Jay, how you doing? What's happening? He says, Pete, I don't want to talk, which was totally unusual for Jay. We spoke, a lot. So he hung up the phone. I said, okay. I got in my car, drove 6.5 hours out to Latrobe, Pennsylvania from New Jersey. And I knocked on his front door and stayed overnight there. And we were at one point in time, and he didn't appear to be suicidal in any way, manner, shape, or form. He was fine and bubbly, and we're sitting on his bedroom floor with 30, 40, 50 pounds of uncut emeralds, and he had bought a bronze Lanteca, which is a deck gun, a bronze cannon, small deck cannon, and had some other weapons, historical flintlocks and things that he had bought, just as artifacts and stuff. He just had them. But so I said, well, I guess he's okay. There's nothing wrong. Well, long story short, along the way, someone appears at Jay's front door somewhere in the timeline. I may be off with my timeline. It's been at least 5 years. So someone appears at Jay's front door, and it's from a reporter from CBS 60 Minutes. We hear you had this find of emeralds. We wanted to know about it, yada yada yada. So they began putting together the story. They talked to Jay, etc. And it was always okay. Part of the plan was 60 Minutes was going to come out with a story. The company was going to raise about $8-9 million. We had talked to they had talked to many people. I was away from the management at that time. I had backed away, but was aware of what was going on from afar. The gentleman who had the largest collection of colored diamonds in the world had a lot of his diamonds on display at the Smithsonian. Jeff Post had wanted to put these emeralds at the Smithsonian. I mean, this was all the things they were planning to do with these emeralds. They were massive quantity. We had probably over 150 pounds of material. Emeralds, amethyst, quartz, little quartz rocks. Jay, at one point in time, had actually gotten representative samples, which I'll show you sheets of. He would take an 8x10 piece of paper. He would have an appraiser appraise a representative sample of these emeralds, and then he'd have a pile of emeralds, maybe 1,000 emeralds, and then one over here that was representative of this batch. They were all together and they're numbered. I forget the.
And whoever the appraiser was just picked any.
No, it was a real. It was a real appraiser, recognized, certified, gemologist who knew emeralds, and it would say, $800. He would estimate $800 a carat or $300 a carat or whatever. And here's 3,000 carats, 4,000 carats, and you got all these $500,000 for this batch, and then we had batches and batches and batches. I'll send you half a dozen of these pictures off my computer. So everybody was excited as heck. The people in New York, the accountants, the investors that Jay was talking to, apparently, the law firm. It was a big law firm that was involved. Jay would always say, oh, I had 6-8 attorneys, and I'm saying, oh my God, what are you paying an hour? I mean, they're not just sitting there to watch how much fun you are. Anyway. So we're waiting for 60 Minutes to appear. 60 Minutes show comes out. All right. As a matter of fact, you'll have a link. I'll send you. You can have a link to it if you want on your on your YouTube shot. It was a great show by Armin Katanyan, I think was the name of the guy that did the show. So we were waiting for that show to happen. We're supposed to raise a couple $1 million for the company. We're going to go recover these emeralds. Along the way, the Fisher family had felt that they could have been from the Etosha, although they were 40 miles away, supposedly where Jay said they came from, and upstream from, if you will, upstream from where the Etosha was, there would be no way a barrel could float that way. Upstream it would go the other way.
So let me back you up just a minute. The original story was told to you that it was found on the beach?
On the beach. The guy found them on the beach. We go out there with a little sifter and keep sifting these out and finding emeralds, and that's where he got them from. And then he had pails full of them.
And then
5-gallon pails full of them.
To the other investors, he changed the story that they was found out in the ocean.
The time I heard the story change was when I met with this gentleman, Dean, and his brother-in-law in West Palm. The guy who was the head.
So now everybody's saying they're out in the ocean on a ship.
Well, no, now they weren't in the ocean. They would supposedly come out of I'll say Florida Gulf. I mean, it'd be on the west side of the Florida. Not in the ocean side, on the bay side, but north of the Keys. North of the Keys. The Keys go out west, and then it would be on the north of on the west coast of Florida, sort of, but up that way. And that was the story where they came from. So 60 Minutes article appears, etc.
So in the Fisher, it's close to where the Etosha was, 40 miles away. So the Fishers thinks he's.
They think maybe he stole them off of there. There had been they had started instituted a lawsuit, which had been followed. They had followed along the whole thing, and that was an ongoing in the courts down in Key West. So. I was being deposed for this court situation, and at first they had canceled one for down here in Florida for my deposition, and I went up to New Jersey, happened to be in New Jersey. It was in October, and I'm going to this deposition, the next day, and I get a call from one of the fellows that are working for the Fisher legal team, and he says, "Hey Pete," and I knew his name was Joe. He said, I got a favor to ask you. I said, sure, what do you want, He He says, we had 2 private investigators watching Jay, and I think he killed himself. I said, whoa. He says, could you find out? I said, okay. So I called up Jennifer, a girlfriend, got no reply. She wasn't home. I just left the message. We had a young girl who had been in office, worked in an office up there, got no reply from her, and I called our attorney first, and he said, I'll get back to you. Well, about 2 hours later, the attorney gets back to me and says, Pete, I talked to the attorneys up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and apparently Jay had called them at like 3:30 in the afternoon and said he was going to he was going to kill himself. They shut down the schools. Jay supposedly went back to his homestead on the mountain and put a gun in his mouth, apparently a shotgun or something, I don't know the details of it, and blew his brains out. Come to find out now, so I was deposed that day, the next day? It was within a day of that. I don't remember how it came down. I guess it was the day before my deposition, I guess. As I recall it, I don't remember. I have the dates all written down, but I just don't remember at the moment. So it ended up in court, and the emeralds were held for several years. The FBI was involved. Everybody was involved. Apparently, Jay had. I don't know if anybody ever really found out what happened. One of the people who came to the. I wasn't there at the court case, but in January, after Jay's death, and I think it was the end of October, he killed himself, or worse, may not have killed himself. One of the gentlemen who appeared in court said, "Well, I sold him those emeralds, for 4 batches of $20,000 cash each." And the question was always, well, then how come Jeff Post of the Smithsonian, Christie's, Sotheby's. Where were we?
The question was, why did Sotheby's?
Oh yeah, okay. So if these emeralds had only been purchased for $80,000 in cash, 2 things. Number one, all of a sudden it only came out after Jay was dead. Okay. And why, and nobody ever pursued the guy who supposedly sold them for $20,000 cash. I'm sure there were some tax consequences or whatever. Be that as it may, the emerald story, the emeralds were held by the government, and finally released years later, and I don't want to know where they went.
So let me ask you some questions though. So you had a gemologist looking at it. He's appraising them, so it came to way more than that $80,000 just one pile.
You'll see some of the I'll show you the batches. There were batches and batches of them. I mean, I'm not a gemologist. I didn't come up with an appraisal. I'll show you these batches that Jay had prepared. All the papers are there. Here's the gemologist's appraisal. Here's the pile of stones that he had with it. One photograph. Here's the numbers. It was many millions. Many millions.
So when I watched that 60-minute deal, and it showed going down, diving, and bringing up emeralds off the ground, going to these different places with 60 minutes showing,
very prominent.
So here's my question: if he's got that kind of a money, of course, maybe you don't know all his problems in life, but he's in this big deal. Why would you do suicide, and then why would somebody else testify that they're basically worthless when they already had, So that sounds like some kind of a conspiracy thing in the making for me. Something happened, went down, and we'll probably never know the real story.
No, I had less than 10%, but more than 5% of the deal, and I didn't pursue it because I just didn't want to be party to. I don't know that Jay died a natural death or took his own life, and it wasn't worth it for me to get involved. And I hadn't been involved for quite a while. And there was a lot of controversy, and it still is. And it was many years that the emeralds were still retained in court, and a lot of attorneys and a lot of legal fees. And supposedly, no matter what they were worth, you know, the attorneys were going to end up with whatever it was anyway. And I backed away, and I used discretion as the better part of valor. I mean, and that's the truth. Sometimes you just gotta, you know. I like living.
So if you want to stay alive, you gotta cut your losses.
I enjoy living, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just, you know, that was one that, you know, I can't explain much of it. And I was there. It started right here on my sofa, and I can't explain a lot of it. And there were some pretty interesting people involved at some pretty high levels.
And with that said, Pete. Thanks for sharing.
It's time for dinner. It's time for dinner.
And that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you.